Hello, everybody, and welcome into another season preview here at the Hockey Writers. I'm your host, Matthew Zator, and we're doing the Utah Mammoth on this one. I got Chase Beardsley, who covers the Mammoth, covered them for the last, 2-3 seasons now?
Yeah, ever
Yeah,
since their last year in Arizona.
yeah. So it's been a few seasons. So thanks for coming on, and how's it going?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How's your summer been?
It's been great. It's been slow for the NHL since July. Lots of stuff not really happening. But we got hockey in about, as we're recording this, in about a month or so. Yeah, training camp's almost around the corner. We got preseason, even though it is a shorter preseason. Thank God. It's always was always too long.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's gonna be an exciting season. Utah Mammoth coming in after making the playoffs for the first time in their existence, and for the Coyotes, first time in a long time. So it's very exciting covering this team, I'm sure. So let's jump right in to the forward group, which had a pretty big couple new additions to their lineup. We got, biggest ones, Vincent Trocheck getting acquired from the Rangers, and then free agency, Anders Lee coming in from the Islanders. Those are the two big ones up front. What do you think about them being added to this pretty talented young group here?
Yeah, I think it's a great step forward in the right direction. I mean, I think this was just the second free agency where the Mammoth really went out and did something big. Obviously, last summer, JJ Paterka, a
Mhm.
couple other faces as well, and then obviously Anders Lee and Vincent Trocheck. They had been rumored around Vincent Trocheck for quite
Mhm.
some time now, and they get him. At his best, he's a great center. He's getting older. However, he's shown that on good teams he can really thrive. It's not too long ago where he had a really good season with the Rangers, 60 plus points. This is a guy who could really go off given the right line mates, given a healthy season. He's not going to be expected to be the guy in Utah. I don't think he's even going to be the top one or two centers on
Mhm.
this Utah team. But in that case, he's going to be more of a support role, which will allow him to kind of relax and maybe have a better season than he had in New York this past season. I'd say probably his worst season, New York.
Mhm.
It dealt with injury, a lot of trade rumors swirling around him. So I'm sure he's very happy to get that off his chest. And then Anders Lee, like that's an awesome addition right there. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people, maybe think he got a little bit overpaid. I think
Mhm.
it's a great addition, especially when you have enough cap space like Utah. Lee's going to be another great leader in this locker room that has a bunch of leaders. They have a bunch of former captains, and now they have the former New York Islander. And
Mhm.
again, he's a guy who his best years may be behind him. He's older in age, but again, in Utah, he's not going to be relied on as the guy.
Mhm.
He'll be a great two-way player, probably right in the middle six. And I think a lot of people are going to love what Anders Lee not just does for, on the ice, but off the ice. He was a big part of the Long Island community and a
Mhm.
lot of charitable efforts out there, especially with the departure of Alex Kerfoot. I think he's going to really step up and be a very, very likable guy in Utah.
Yeah, big veteran leader, like you say. He's a guy that was captain of the Islanders for a number of years. So yeah, he's a big veteran presence, and like you say, not the biggest goal scorer anymore, but obviously has the talent to score. And we'll see what he does. And yeah, Trocheck, very good two-way player, and potentially could add a lot of offense to the team as well. All right, well, let's jump into the storylines going to this forward group because again, very talented. Led by Clayton Keller as always. He's still their best player. And then you're looking at the young guys. Dylan Genther had a breakout season last season, just keeps getting better. And then you're looking at. I mean, they had the thing with the offer sheet with Barrett Hayton. They matched it, which he's still around. Maybe his money a bit high right now, but what do you think? Biggest storylines heading in, and of course, JJ Paterka getting traded to the Bruins after only one season in Utah. But what are the biggest storylines heading in here?
Well, I think, the overarching storyline is, can the Mammoth return to the playoffs after making it last season and continue growing in their development and their path towards a Stanley Cup contender? I think the goal for this season is to be a top three team in division and probably win a playoff round. They
Mhm.
really were disappointed that they didn't win that round against Vegas, although they had their chances. So I think that's the big overarching theme. Look, there's a lot of other storylines, like the rookies. There's a lot of them that will jump into the pro level this year, like TJ Ginla and Caleb Benoit. So
Mhm.
how will they make the roster? Will Logan Cooley finally be a point per game player? It seemed like that's where he was going last season before really bad injury. I believe that was against Canucks, actually.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then, there's a bunch of other storylines like Lawson Krause. He's entering his final year contract year. Can he continue off what he had last season and not fall back to what he had the previous season in Utah, where he had a career low, under 20 points and stuff like that? But I think the big storyline here is, can the Mammoth continue progressing as a team, especially given their new additions that they had
Mhm.
this summer?
For sure. I mean, just keep getting better and being a perennial playoff team, not just one, and then they're, out of the playoffs again. And you want them to be in that mix of the top Central Division teams. And we'll talk about the division later on. But being in that, not rebuild anymore. They're out of that. They're supposed to be a contender now, and we'll see if they can continue that for sure. All right, to the blue line, new additions, only one really, Andrew Peeke. And I mean, he's a good defenseman, but probably not going to move the needle too much on the blue line. He'll probably be a good penalty killer. He's not as good as he was in Columbus. He was okay in Boston. But what do you think about him being added to this pretty talented blue line when you're looking at Mackenzie Weegar getting his first full season with the team? But for just coming out of the offseason, it's just Peeke.
Well, I think you mentioned, yeah, Andrew Peeke is the one like lone like true addition to this team. And we'll see how he does. He'll be great in a bottom pairing role, and that's exactly what he's going to be. He's going to be dueling it out with Nick DeSimone, probably for that sixth defenseman spot. They needed another defenseman, especially after Ian Cole left. Andrew Peeke is a solid enough player to kind of fill those boots. But this is Mackenzie Weegar's first full season with Utah. And I think, at times he struggled last year at the very beginning when he transitioned from Calgary, which is a team that wasn't making the playoffs, was towards the bottom of the league, not a great team defensively, going straight from that to a Utah team firing on all cylinders, trying to make the playoffs, surrounded by talented guys like Sergachev and Marino and stuff. I think that does weigh heavily, but he had a great playoffs. He was tied for the entire team leading points. Can he continue that production? And I think if he can, which I really do believe he can, I think he'll be a great addition to this Utah team. Again, I think that's going to be one underrated thing going into this season, is that, yes, Andrew Peeke was the one on paper thing like that they added, but Mackenzie Weegar finally having a full season in Utah will be pretty awesome for not just him, but Sergachev as well, who had a little bit of a dip last year. And also Dmitry Simashev.
Yeah.
We'll see how he does. He probably will also challenge for a spot in that blue line. So there's not a lot of additions on paper, but there are a lot of players that will have probably their first full season in Utah.
Yeah, I was going to say with Simashev, he only had 28 games last season, and he'll probably get closer to a full season, you'd think, this year. So, I mean, we'll see. He can progress in his development, and very talented young guy as well. All right, looking at those storylines for this blue line, and pretty formidable when you're looking at the top four with Weegar added there. What are those big storylines surrounding them?
Yeah, I mean, can Mackenzie Weegar kind of produce like he did in the playoffs and, really be an anchor on this blue line and pair well with Mikhail Sergachev? I think is a good one. I think Dmitry Simashev obviously is the big question mark. Is he going to make the NHL full time? Last year, he split time between Utah and Tucson. He had a really good year in Tucson. I was always impressed when I saw him on the ice. He just looked far and beyond the best player on the ice on both sides. So, can he kind of translate that play that he had where he was really offensively talented for the first time in his career? He didn't produce a lot in the KHL, but goes over to Tucson, nearly a point per game player, AHL All-Star. Can he have that all year in Utah and make team full time? I think another big thing is, can Nate Schmidt and John Marino recreate the special care or chemistry they had this past season? They were arguably one of the best defensive pairings in the Central Division. And Marino had a very, very good season that resulted in him getting a long-term contract this offseason. So I think, there's pretty good questions there. I think those are going to be your big three going into this season.
And then Maverick Lamoureux as well, who could be in that mix too. So yeah. There's a good amount of talent on the blue line. We'll see how it all kind of plays out. All right, goaltending. Now this had a big addition to it, and actually really surprised me because I didn't think the Red Wings would do this. Trade Sebastian Cossa, and they traded him to the Utah Mammoth, and now he'll pair with Karel Vejmelka and Michael Hrabal, who could potentially be in that mix as well. A very good trio of goaltenders, but of course, starting with Cossa being the biggest, I would say the biggest addition this offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he might be another guy who's very, the addition of him will be overshadowed by Anders Lee and Vincent Trocheck, but this is going to go a long way. The last 2 seasons, it's been really hard for Karel Vejmelka because he hasn't had a stable backup. The first season in Utah, Connor Ingram, obviously a bunch of stuff around him, and departs the team, halfway through the season. And they rely on Matt Vialta and Jackson Stauber, which are guys who are fringe NHL goaltenders, but not guys this team really trusted playing games. Last season, they brought in Vitek Vanacek, who struggled. It felt like most of the time in Utah. And again, Karel Vejmelka ended up playing a bunch of games. He started the most games in the whole NHL, and you can't overwork Karel Vejmelka. And I think that was a problem the past 2 seasons of Vejmelka starting every single game. It felt like, especially that first season in Utah where he did start every single game from the All-Star break to the end of the season except one. I think you can't do that if you're trying to make the playoffs and trying to make a long bye into the playoffs and enter Sebastian Cossa. There's a big question mark. He has only played 1 NHL game, and that wasn't even a full NHL game that he played. So, that's going to be a big question mark. Is he ready to take the next step? I mean, if you look at his stats in Grand Rapids, I would say yes. They've been really good. And obviously Detroit, they have a backlog in their goaltending system. Cossa really wants to make the jump. Utah has swirled around him. That's another guy that Utah swirled around for a while, and they get their guy. And with him and Vejmelka, I think Utah might have a really, really solid goaltending tandem. We spoke to Cossa, early when he first got traded. He flew out to Utah, a couple days after he was traded. Not a lot of people do that. And he seemed very, very confident. I think he's a very, very confident player. And I think that will really help, especially when you're behind a guy who has started some of the most games in the past couple of seasons. You mentioned Michael Hrabal. I think, the plan eventually is going to have him and Cossa as your A and B goaltenders. And Hrabal had a really solid end of the season. He comes over from UMass. He puts up some really good games. I believe that he had a lot of saves, a 30-plus save performance against, I believe it was the Eagles last year towards the end of the season. He looked really good. His height obviously really allows him to make a lot of saves, and I think that's his biggest asset. And I think it's great that he's going to be in Tucson. Matt Vialta is gone, so they're going to be rocking Jackson Stauber and Hrabal. I'd expect Hrabal to start more than half the games there in Tucson and take the reins. I don't know about getting any NHL games unless something big injury wise happens. Maybe towards the end of the season if they lock down a playoff spot. But again, I think allowing Harabel to marinate in the AHL behind what should be a very, very good Tucson team is what's best for his career. And come 2 years, I would say, allow him to really develop down there, bring him up, and then you'll have a really good goaltending room of Vejmelka, Harabel, and Kosa. So we'll see how it happens. Kosa's obviously a big addition. Could be the biggest addition, honestly, for the Mammoth this season. But I think the Mammoth's goaltending department is pretty strong heading into this season.
Yeah, I agree, and I've liked Kosa. Of course, I did grind line for a number of seasons, and always talked about Kosa being a little maybe disappointing at first because, of course, he was drafted ahead of Jesper Wallstedt, who has turned into a pretty good NHL goaltender now. And we'll see where Kosa kind of falls in the next few seasons if he can raise to that level. But I think he definitely has the potential. And you're looking at the size. You mentioned size with Harabel. Kosa's 6'6" as well. You can have a pretty big goaltending tandem in the future. Both 6'6". So, yeah, big guys. All right, let's move to the division and mention with the Central Division being a pretty. It's always top heavy, and it's ending up to be. It could end up being one of the toughest divisions. Once all these teams, once the Chicago Blackhawks figure it all out, the Jets return to prominence. You're going to have a really tough Central coming up. Maybe not top heavy, maybe just in general. But where does Utah kind of fall right now?
It's tough. I don't think they're on the caliber of a Colorado Avalanche. I do think they're behind the Dallas Stars right now. I think those are your top two teams in the division. And I think they slot in nicely alongside the Minnesota Wild, battling for that third spot in the division. I think they're very, very similar as of where they're at in their development and progression of their separate trajectories. I think Utah is entering their window of contention, but they're not quite to the point where they have all their prospects developed, all their big players developed, like Colorado and like Dallas. And I think that will eventually happen. But for now, I think they're a 3-4 team in their division. I think, there's going to be a couple teams challenging. I think Minnesota obviously is the big one. We'll see how Nashville does this season. I'm curious how they'll do. I think St. Louis is going to have a bounce back year. Winnipeg and Chicago, you can say whatever. Those are two teams that have gone better this summer. Winnipeg maybe not as much, but Chicago, added Patrick Kane back. They had some also other players come in. And it's a really tough division. And I think they're lucky that the Pacific Division is as weak as it is. And that's kind of how they got into the playoffs in the first place last year, because wild card 1, 2, were kind of open for them. The goal is to get at the very least that third spot in the division, try to get, that a spot in the division. And I think if they do, I think it'll be a pretty successful season in terms of the regular season success.
Yeah, I agree. I think they have the talent to be in that mix, and we'll see if Dallas can stay where they are, because they didn't really change throughout the offseason. Getting Jason Robertson signed and all that, so they're still a very talented team. So I think I do agree. I think they're the top two, and I think Utah does kind of fall with Minnesota as well. So they're going to be up there for sure for a playoff spot. All right, let's go to our quick fire round. Biggest storyline. What do you think? We mentioned quite a few things with the forward group and the defense, the goaltending. What's your biggest question mark storyline coming into this season?
Oh, man. I'm sorry to complicate it, but I have two. All right, get ready for this. I think, can Logan Cooley take the next step forward into becoming a point per game player? I think he showed stretches of dominance last year and points where he was by far the best player in Utah. Obviously, a lot of injuries. Like, he was handed a really bad one that took him out for most of December, January, and February. That was really brutal, because heading into that, he was putting up hat tricks. He obviously put up a hat trick in the first period in a game against the Blues, had one against Vegas. He was really firing off. And I think in the first couple of games in the postseason, too, he was really firing off. Can he take that next step and become not just a point per game player, but also the highest producing player on this team? It's been Clay and Keller ever since they been in Utah, so the past 2 seasons. I genuinely think Cooley has the weapons and the ability to do that, especially if he's given the line mates to do so. He really thrived on the line of Kailer Yamamoto. Once they added him with Dylan Gunther and him, they really took off because Kailer Yamamoto knows how to play with top line players who are skilled and as speedy as Logan Cooley and Dylan Gunther. So if they can reassemble a line or find another line mate like that, I genuinely think Logan Cooley could become the best player on this team. And I think the other big storyline is, I think what a lot of people are talking about, the rookies. Which rookies will make the jump forward? There are quite a few making their pro debuts besides the big ones like TJ Ginla and Caleb Desnoyers. You also have someone like Gabe Smith, who could be really sneaky and really put up a really good season in Tucson. There's a couple other guys. I believe Thomas Lavoie is also going to make his pro debut soon. Watch out for Max Pasnica. Obviously, last year he played 2 games with Tucson and looked really good. Who knows if he makes another step forward and joins Tucson full time next season. I don't know, but that is a big storyline going into the next season.
Yeah, I mean, Utah is emerging, and you got so many young guys, in the prospect pool is really strong still. For a team that's now, I would say, a playoff team, and yeah, there's gonna be a lot of young guys to watch, and we'll talk about a few later on as well. All right, breakout stars, and there's so many rookies, so many players that haven't broken out yet. Who do you see as the biggest one this season?
I think Cooley obviously is like the big one in terms of, I think he's going to have a big year. So going outside of that, I think if he's given the right weapons and the right line mates, kind of like what I said about Cooley, I really think Kailer Yamamoto could have a really strong season. I think his couple of games, his last 14 games of last season, he was one of the best players on this Utah team and showed in the postseason where he was up there in points. I believe he was tied for the team lead. There's a reason why they brought him back on a 2-year deal. This is a guy who has done his time in Tucson, working his way back to the NHL team. And then last year proved he can still be a top 6 player and an efficient one at that. I think if he's given those tools again, I think he could really have a special season. He obviously hasn't had like a big season since his time in Edmonton. He hasn't played close to a full season since his time in Edmonton. I think that could change this year. I think they believe in him. His height obviously has always been the thing that bogs him down, but I think everywhere he's been and how good he plays and how respectful and determined he is to be an NHLer, I just keep hearing, why is this guy here? This guy should be further up. It happened in Tucson. He should have played more games last year. I think he could really be set up for a big season next year.
Yeah, I've always liked Yamamoto, and everyone knows that watches Prospect Corner. Anything I've said, I love the undersized players succeeding. So I'm happy that Yamamoto's back in the NHL as I would say, a full-time player again. And I was surprised that he ended up in the AHL for a while. So I'm happy that he's back. And yeah, a very exciting player to watch, and very determined guy too. And that's obviously an attribute of a lot of undersized guys, but he's a big one for sure. All right, bounce back. Who needs to bounce, or who will, I guess, bounce back candidates for this season?
I think Barrett Hayton is the big one. There was a lot of drama surrounding him. He obviously gets offer sheeted by New Jersey. And if they re-signed him, then Utah would be walking him straight to unrestricted free agency next summer, and they cannot trade him. So it's a big risk accepting that offer sheet and rejecting the pick that New Jersey would have sent. So they clearly believe in Barrett Hayton, and Barrett Hayton struggled last season. If you look at Baron Hayden's career, though, it's always an injury-riddled season that's disappointing, followed by a really good season. Last season, the first season in Utah, he played really well. Obviously, this past season, he has 25 points in 67 games. This is a guy who we know can score 40, 50 points. He obviously had 46 points the first season in Utah. They want him to get back there. He'll be given the opportunity to do that. The goal, though, is to avoid injury. Although if he can do that, and if he can really, truly have a bounce back season, could be in for a big payday either with Utah or someone else. But again, he will be given every opportunity to succeed. Had a very disappointing year last year, only played one postseason game. We'll see what he can do this year.
He's getting paid pretty good money he can't have that type of season again. And but you say has the potential to do it, and I think he could be a bounce back for sure. All right, X factors. There's lots of places you can go, but what's an X factor for the Mammoth this season?
I've always said their speed, I think, is the biggest weapon they have. They have a lot of guys who just thrive on skating. Guys like Logan Cooley and Dylan Gunther, their speed allows them to really unleash their skill. Like Gunther's one-timer that has gotten him so many goals in this league. Cooley, obviously, last year, had a lot of breakaway goals, and that was part of the reason why he was injured. But, his speed is really great. And a lot of these guys have a lot of speed, including someone like Clayton Keller and Nick Schmaltz, guys who produce a lot of points. And I think in terms of X factor players, those are four that we just mentioned that are going to be a big part if the Mammoth want to keep their postseason streak alive. I think on the blue line, obviously, your big guys like Sergachev and Uyghur. Uyghur being around for a full season will really help. And then Vejmelka, I think his, boatload of games, his workload, if it's reduced, I think we could see Vejmelka be even better. Obviously, he was in the top couple of guys that in terms of wins last season. And yes, he played a lot of games to win those games, but he also was phenomenal in a lot of those games. And I think he showed, including in the postseason, that this is a guy who could win you a series or two. And I think that's a big X factor. And I think his commitment to play as much as possible, but also play at his top game as high as possible. I think those are things that are huge in like the Mammoth winning or not.
Yeah, they definitely got to reduce his workload. It's a 2-goalie league in this now. And as much as some of these goalies think they can play a ton, and he did do very well, but I think you reduce that workload and he'll be better. And you'd hope that Kosa could maybe split it close to 50-50, and that would be good for both guys. I think you don't want Kosa sitting too much because he is a really young goaltender still. You don't want him to be relegated to only 20 or 30 starts. You want him to be up there. So we'll see how they kind of split those. But I think he definitely does need a workload to be reduced for sure. All right, we mentioned already the rookies prospects, but who do you think could surprise and make the roster? We're really not expecting at 2 at this point.
I think everyone expects at this point that Dmitry Simashev makes the roster. I think, they've kind of carved it out that he's going to be on this team come October. And like we mentioned, there's quite a few prospects who are going to be on the verge of making the NHL and having a full-time job up there. TJ Ginla obviously is one. He's not surprising, but he is one of those guys. Daniel Boot last year obviously had a strong season in the AHL, and the NHL just couldn't put it together. And I see a lot of guys say, like if he goes back to Tucson, he's going to activate his European assignment clause and get out of there. I don't see that happening. I think people are really underestimating that the AHL is a top league, and so is the KHL. Don't get me wrong, but I think Boot is determined to make this Utah team, and I think if he goes over to the KHL, that he knows that hey, like that's not going to help me as much as
Yeah.
if I grinded it out in the AHL and get call ups. And then at one point I go off in the NHL and I stay up there.
Yeah.
Um, so I wouldn't be surprised if he starts the year in the AHL. I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes the year in
Yeah.
the NHL. I think Caleb Denoyer, I mean, the new CBA rule of having, younger guys that should be in the Canadian Hockey League in the
Mm.
CHL, having one of those guys that can join the AHL, that rule was made for him. He's going to be
Yeah.
in Tucson next year. He's going to be there probably all season long. And I expect great things from him. But again, there are a lot of prospects that could make that next step. I think Gabe Smith is a good one. He had a phenomenal year last year with Caleb Denoyer in the Q. Obviously, he was made the Q playoff MVP.
Yeah.
And there's good reason for that. This is a guy who could really grind it out so that in camp, he'll have a long camp. Again, people seem to forget that he was with the Mammoth last training camp up until the very end. He was there for
Yeah.
a long time. This is a guy who could sneak out a spot. He really could. I believe in him that much.
Mm.
He has a lot of talent. Even if he's in the AHL next season, he's a guy that could really, perform well and surprise everyone, and
Mhm.
maybe even more than guys like Caleb Denoyer, who
Yeah.
might struggle for that, pro experience where it's more hitting, more physical. Gabe Smith's just built for that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other guys. You mentioned Maverick Lemarou a couple minutes back. I
Mm.
think he needs another year in the A, but we'll see how he does. Artem Duda, obviously,
Yeah.
last year his season was cut short to injury. It'll be very interesting to see how he does entering his third season in the AHL, I believe, or fourth. It's 1, 2. Maximilian Zuber is out now. He's gone. He's traded.
Yeah.
So this is Artem Duda's blue line with Maverick Lamoureux, most likely. There's a couple other guys like Lavoie, and there's going to be Owen Allard, who I thought had a really strong season last season. There are guys still kicking down there like Cam Hebig and Ben McCartney who
Yeah.
could carve out really good like depth roles. I think the big guys are always going to have the most spotlight, but I think the most surprising guys will be like Gabe Smith or Ben McCartney or Cameron
Mm.
Hebig, who carve out a depth spot and really thrive in the NHL on that role. But even if they're back in the AHL this season and they're in another top 6 role, I think they'll go off, and I think a
Mm.
lot of people will be surprised.
Training camp's gonna be interesting. Like, it's all those guys.
Yes.
We're gonna be watching a lot of young talent that potentially could make the roster, and then watching Tucson's gonna be exciting again this
Yes.
season as well, with all those pro debuts there, and that 19-year-old rule. I think they should allow more than just one, but
Yeah,
I think it should be 2 or 3. But
I agree with that 100%. But going back to your point about Tucson being exciting to watch, I spoke to the head coach, Steve Potvin, actually the other day. And, I've known him for a while, ever since I started covering Tucson. And he said that this is going to be one of the best teams this franchise has ever iced in franchise history. And I agree with that. He's very excited for this season to start. And I think a lot of the additions that Tucson made as well are really big, like bring back Kevin Rooney. I think that it's going to be big for them. And I think it's going to be big for guys like Caleb Denoyer and, TJ Ginla as well, because Kevin Rooney really helped Daniel Boot adjust to the pro level. And I think he's going to do the same with these guys that come over next year.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch for sure. All right, well, the prospects to watch, these are probably just repeat, but is there anyone else that's maybe outside of potentially not being in Tucson or the NHL, but they've got other guys in the prospect pool that are going to be playing in junior in the KHL? But who should everyone be watching outside of that?
I think Ethan Belshitz is the big one. He'll probably make the World Juniors Team Canada roster. They drafted him in the first round this past summer. Obviously, they traded up to draft him as well. So
yeah,
I think he'll be fun to watch. I think Adam Valentini, who they drafted this summer as well, he's another guy that's undersized, but he reminds me of Kailer Yamamoto in the fact that he might be a really good point producer. The fact that he's playing in NCAA, same with Belchitz as well. That's awesome. I think that that's a big step forward from the CHL. I think those two guys and Max Pasniccia, obviously I mentioned played 2 games last year in Tucson, and then played most of the year in the WHL of Portland. I really loved his season last year. I think he's a very underrated blue line prospect. I think he can be a really big sneaky part of, if he goes back to Tucson, he had 1 point in 2 games. That's pretty big accomplishment, given that you play a whole season in Portland, you come over and you fit right in. I think, we mentioned Michael Harabel and net in Tucson. That'll be fun to watch. And we mentioned most of the other guys. Again, I think a lot of the guys, who will be really fun to watch are going to be the guys who are like very like underrated, like a Gabe Smith. I think we all know what TJ Ginla, Caleb Denwye, and Daniel Boot can bring. I want to see what Thomas Lavoie brings to this Tucson team, or Igor Borikov, or all these guys. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of them. I'm excited to see Owen Allard's or second full season in Tucson. I'm very excited for that because that guy's a grinder. There's a lot of guys like that I'm pretty excited for. I feel like I'm missing someone too, which is so funny. And maybe it will come back to me, but a lot of these guys I'm very excited to see. But I think it's great that Utah has all these guys still in the pipeline and they're icing a competitive team now. I think that shows that they might be in their playoff window, but they don't even have their best team out on the ice.
Yeah, I agree.
That's pretty impressive. Brandon Holt is another one. He signed a AHL contract and last season. That's going to kick in this season. Came over from Maine. I thought he had a really good, kind of like Max Pasniccia, had a really good couple of games in the AHL. I'm excited to see what he does this year. He was at development camp this past summer. One of the only guys actually who didn't have a NHL contract or entry-level deal or drafted by Utah, but I thought he played well during development camp. I'm excited to see him at rookie camp, and I'm excited to see what he can do at the AHL, maybe earn a contract, an NHL contract soon. Same with Cal Thomas, by the way. That was a guy who his rights were expiring. Arizona drafted him a while ago. Tucson signs him to a AHL deal. Can he work his way to entry-level deal and prove, hey, my rights should have been retained, or maybe another NHL team picks him up. So I think there's a lot of exciting guys. And like I said, that Tucson team's going to be so fun to watch.
Yeah, it is a good thing to have still a really good pipeline and be in the playoff mix all the time. And that's how the Dallas Stars, that's how, teams like that have been able to do it. And they've been, and Winnipeg Jets being teams that have a great prospect pool, but also playoff type teams as well. So Carolina, they're another team that just always has a great prospect pool, yet they always make the playoffs. So that's impressive. We'll see how Utah does. They obviously have a lot of top picks that are driving the bus right now. And it'll end up being, will the scouting staff be able to find those gems in the 20s in the, that range, because you won't have the top 10, top 15 picks anymore if you're always making the playoffs. So we'll see if they can continue that. All right. These are common suspects, but who do you see leading the team in scoring and goals and points? It could be the same player for both, but who do you see there?
The past couple of seasons, I've said Clayton Keller. Let's change it up. I think Logan Cooley's going to lead this team in points. Goals, though, I think Dylan Guenther is going to lead this team. I think this is a 50-goal scorer in the making one day. I really do. That shot is just unreal. There's a reason why guys say it's one of the top shots in the NHL, and that's going in the Mammoth locker room, outside the Mammoth locker room, and other locker rooms. A lot of guys believe that Dylan Guenther is a perennial goal scorer. So I'm going to say Dylan Guenther, goal scorer, or is going to lead this team in goals. Don't think he hits 50 this year, but I think he's on the road to that. And Logan Cooley, I think, leads this team in points. I think it's going to be tight between him and Keller again, but I think, again, if they can really pair Logan Cooley with the talent they had last season with guys he just really clicks with, I really do believe he can be a point per game player and above. I think he can hit the 100 point plateau one day. I mean, I've been saying the same about Keller, and he's been close. And I think there still is a 100-point season in the bag for him one day. But I think Cooley, I think he's on the road to that.
Dylan Guenther, I mean, I'm bitter that the Canucks didn't draft him because they traded that pick. And I swear in an alternate reality, they didn't trade it. They would have drafted Guenther because that was the guy that they were going to pick before they traded it to actually get Ekman Larsson. But that's way in the past and whatever. But I love watching Guenther play. He's one of my favorite players in the outside of the Canucks. So I could definitely see him hitting 50 for sure at some point. All right, last but not least, as a bold prediction, I love doing these because they're so fun. But bold prediction or hot take for the Mammoth this season?
I don't think it's too bold to say Logan Cooley leads the team in points because I've been saying that. I think a lot of people agree with that. I was on the Mammoth radio show actually the other day, and that was my hot take for them. But apparently a lot of people believe that. So I'm gonna change it up. I think TJ Ginla, Daniel Boot, and Caleb Denway all don't make the NHL team out of camp. I think a lot of people are betting on Daniel Boot or TJ Ginla to make this team out of camp. I think the European, we talked about the European assignment clause really scares people. And I think, a lot of people love what Tej brought during his last season in Kelowna. But I think everyone needs to calm down a little bit. I think the pro level is completely different beast. And I think Daniel Boot really saw, hey, I played in the KHL last season, but the NHL is another step forward.
Yeah.
I think all these guys, at least Ginla and Boot, see NHL time this season and yo-yo back between Utah and Tucson. But I think they're all going to start the season down in Tucson. And I really do believe that's what's best for their development. You look at guys before them like Dylan Guenther, Josh Stone, Lawson Krause, a lot of these guys who are big-time players in the NHL right now, they all started in Tucson. And they all yo-yoed back between Utah and Tucson at times. And I think that's how you become a really good NHLer. You have to earn that spot. You're not just given it. You have to earn it. And I think playing in the AHL, which can be arguably the toughest league because people are giving it their all for a NHL job. This is their job, their life on the line. I think getting to kind of play in Tucson, again, behind a really good team, a really good coach, in what most likely will be a playoff bound division because almost every team makes it in the Pacific Division down there. I think that will really improve their development. And you'll see them one day really reflect on, hey, Tucson really helped me, just like Dylan Guenther, Josh Stone, and all these guys really preach, and especially how Andre Turney preaches as well all the time when he's asked about it.
AHL is a great league. It's one of the, it's called a development league for a reason. It is a great league for these guys to go through. And I agree. I think it's not bad for them to go down there and get some games. And especially Utah doesn't need to rush them either. They've got a good team. They don't necessarily need them to be there. Just take it slow. And it's happened. It's worked for a lot of these guys. And I agree. I think it's not something that, unless they blow the socks off everyone, of course, I make the team. But I think they're not guaranteed spots for sure. All right. Well, this we've said many times, Utah's going to be a very exciting team again this season to watch. They're one of the rising teams in the NHL in talent and how they play. They're not a doormat anymore. They're one of the top contenders. You play Utah, you're probably expected that you're going to have a very competitive game. So I've seen that firsthand. The Canucks have not beaten Utah yet in the history yet. So, it's tough. I think they've got a point out of them. That's it.
I believe so.
I think it was in the shootout. But it's a tough team to play. So, and we'll see how they do this season. Thanks, Chase, for coming on, talking Utah as always. And we'll see what happens this season. Make sure to check out everything at thehockeybears.com. We got great articles throughout. I know you're still doing your report cards for last season, so keep up with that. Check all the other preview stuff we're going to have coming out throughout the preseason, throughout training camp, and then, of course, when the season starts. But until our next preview show, we will see you next time.